So we'll pick up where we left off from last week, or 2 weeks ago, when we covered chapters number 6, 7, 8, and 9 of the book AntiChrist by St. Robert Bellarmine. And we learned in covering those chapters in the lead up here to what we're going to cover today, which is the chapter on the number 666. We learned more about Bellarmine's ability and his task, that his mission that he set out to answer the reformers, or those men that were calling themselves reformers at the day, including John Calvin. And this is, by the way, Volume 2 of Calvin was wrong. Volume 1 of Calvin was wrong. Covered the book on the controversy over the Roman Pontiff, Volume 1 and Volume 2, translated by our Latinist expert, Ryan Grant, who will be with us momentarily here. In the previous episode, we had learned that one of the accusations that was used by Calvin and Illyricus and Luther and other reformers at the time was that the Pope was the Antichrist, and he was the Antichrist that was spoken of and mentioned in the Gospels, or in the book of the Apocalypse. And what we learned through St. Robert Bellarmine is, and Bellarmine answered every single one of the charges. And what's fascinating to me still about this series here, folks, and you can listen to all previous episodes of Modern Wrong World Made Right with Ryan Grant at VeritasRadioNetwork.com. We have, about 30 episodes, I think, that it's taken us to get this far. One of the fascinating things about this, though, and it will be the case today, is that Bellarmine's arguments are not necessarily theological. They are factual. And what Bellarmine does, or what he did, was subject the claims that were made by Luther and Calvin and others, and he subjects them to the historical record. And we find over and over and over, time and time again, in almost every single instance, that the claims that were made do not stand up to scrutiny when they are compared against what actually did happen and what was recorded that happened. And so today, when we get to the what most people would think of and do think of when they think of Antichrist, they think you may think of this, you may see it in horror movies or in movies about the occult. The number 666, the mark of the beast. And this comes from the book on the Apocalypse, chapter number 13. And that's where we'll pick off with where we left off. And this is in chapter 10 of the book Antichrist by Bellarmine. That is available at my website at mikechurch.com/shop. By the way, the Founders Trading Post, Mike Church Show's Founders Trading Post, has now been made mobile phone friendly, and it will load right up, just like the Veritas Radio Network site loads right up now, and has its own menu that is built in to help you navigate, and shopping is made easier than ever before. And we carry this book. We carry volume 1 and 2 of the controversy on the Roman Pontiff, and we also carry the Antichrist book, which is volume 3. And last week, in covering chapter 9, the sixth proof, the end of the world, we had seen this from the book of Daniel, chapter 7, and the book of the Apocalypse, chapter 20. And now we proceed to Bellarmine's argument against Antichrist. And this one is on the name Antichrist. And one of the things that we've covered thus far in the previous weeks on volume 2 here, Calvin was wrong, is the use of the term Antichrist. That the argument was made that popes, plural, were a succession of antichrists. And Bellarmine proves from the scriptures that the Antichrist is mentioned always in singular, as in there's only going to be one, and then the parameters and the conditions under which he will appear. And as I said, the argument has been fleshed out and is made by those Protestant reformers, and point by point, it is addressed, historically speaking, by Bellarmine. And today we actually pick up on the name Antichrist, and then we get into the history of, I guess, and the use of the term, the number 666. And we are now joined by our Latinist expert. Ryan Grant is on the Dude Maker Skype line with us. Ryan, we're excited to get to chapter 10 in here and learn a little bit about the mark of the beast and the number 666. How are you?
Not bad, thank you.
Good, glad to have you. Ryan has sent me a note earlier today, and he sent it to me in Latin. I guess he thinks my studies are going better than they are. and I had to, I could almost read it, but I just wanted to make sure. And I wrote Ryan back and said, well, I'm writing back to number one, make sure you're not in purgatory, and number two, to see that you're not angry, because the word ira was used.
Ire, which means
Ire.
to go.
Which means what?
To go.
To go, okay.
Ire. So I wrote necessi est mihi, ire, ad perganda viscera mea, which basically means I have to go use the toilet.
Well, the interim and the mihi meum, I got all that. I just need to brush up on my vocabulary. So, everyone agrees that these words of John in the Apocalypse pertain entirely to Antichrist. As chapter number 10 begins from St. Robert Bellarmine, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the number 666. Why don't you go ahead and start and walk us through how all this is set up?
Well, in the first place, we should talk about the 666 and the very idea of what's communicated there. How is it that a number communicates something about someone? And so this is called Gematria, Gematria. And it's like an Assyrian, Babylonian, Greek system that's also used heavily in Jewish culture, which basically, to make it easy, because everyone knows Roman numerals, right? You've got letters that function as numbers. Gematria is the opposite. You have numbers or a cipher system of numbers that actually come out to meaning words, right? And so with the number values that you can acquire through different letters, you can get almost a cipher,
okay,
right? Of sorts, like a code for saying a certain name. Okay, and so it's from this that the Protestants claim that 666 is a secret, code in the book of the Apocalypse to tell us who Antichrist is. Okay, and so here's an example of gematria that everybody uses today. It's spelled like chai tea, but it's pronounced hai in Hebrew.
Okay,
and it's just a letter, right? So hai it's the Hebrew. A couple Hebrew letters make a visual symbol, which means alive, like I'm alive. So it's a form of gematria. It goes back a while. So it's very popular today in Israel, even amongst non-Jews. Because it adds up to the letters add up to 18, which is a lucky number for the Jews, and so that's an example of gematria right there. See, we have 666 in the book of the Apocalypse, and so it's from that obviously that the numbers add up to, and they get different things. It adds up to Nero Caesar. It adds up to other things like that. So with Greek numbers are a little bit complicated. So the numbers in the Greek is that you have alpha is 1, and then you have beta is another one is 2,
mm-hmm.
Gamma is 3, delta is 4, etc. So going through the letters, and then as the certain combinations of them get you to to hundreds, and to more than hundreds, as it is. I mean, it just literally goes up until you get to 10, with lambda. Then with kappa, the K, you get 20. And then with lambda, you get 30, mu, you get 40, nu 50. That goes up. And then with rho, it's in the hundreds, right? So then various combinations of these numbers will get you, will get you 666. Okay, so that's where the issue is, and that's where Bellarmine's going to take it up. Now, for my own part, I tend to agree with Dr. Robertson Jenis that Gematria is actually not what's taking place in the apocalypse, and we can talk about that another time. But for the minute, this is one of the things that in all Protestant works in the 16th century you will find this particular, question taken up to prove that the Pope is the Antichrist, because in some way, 666 must be the Pope. Today, sometimes you'll find that Protestants saying, "Oh, the Pope has a hat with Roman numerals on it that all come out to 666," and oh, really? Where is that? Of course, it's total red herring. It's not at all.
They don't ever offer photographs of said hat.
Not usually. So I saw once a drawing where it was drawn on the hat. But I mean, come on, who knows who drew it on the it was his mitre. It was John Paul II, it was his mitre. And it's like, okay, who drew that on his mitre? Is it there? Do you have an actual photograph of those Roman numerals on the mitre? I mean, forget it. It's you could scar all the the ones you want. Besides, who would possibly be so stupid as to put that, if he was the Antichrist, just put that out there, come on. But nevertheless, let's get onto it. So he takes up this particular disputation, and so Bellarmine begins. Everyone agrees that these words of John in the Apocalypse pertain entirely to Antichrist. Quote, "He will make all small with the great, rich and poor, free and slave, to have his mark on their right hand, or on their foreheads, so that no one will be able to buy or sell unless he shall have this mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. This is wisdom. He who has the knowledge will reckon the number of the beast. His number is of man, and that number is 666. That's Apocalypse chapter 13. So now Bellarmine goes on, there's a great many opinions of this number. First is of those who say that this number does not designate a name, but the time of the arrival of the death of Antichrist. Bullinger means this in his preface to his homilies on the Apocalypse, that this is the time of the arrival of Antichrist, namely the year 666. The Centurions of Magdeburg say likewise that it designates the time of the Antichrist. But some, like Clistovius, claim that in the writings of John Damascene, that it means the death of Muhammad, whom he calls the Antichrist. Lyranus on this citation agrees with those who do not quite think Muhammad is the Antichrist, but still believe this number means the death of Muhammad was going to be the year 666 AD. This opinion is most absurd, firstly because John says that he speaks concerning the number of the name of the beast. Secondly, because the beast, whose number this is, will command all businessmen, so that they will use that number in contracts, as is obvious from the Apocalypse 13. Therefore, the number does not pertain to the death of the beast, but rather to the period when he is living. The third is also false, that Muhammad died in the year 666. Some say he died in the year 637, like Matthew Palmarius, others in the year 630, and so on and so forth. And in fact, the accepted date for Muhammad's death today is 632 AD.
Okay.
In case anyone's wondering. I believe that's right. Actually, you know what? I should double check that. I'm pretty sure that's right, though. But anyway, so it's not the case. Although it's a very tempting thought, on the one hand, given the geopolitics we face today, it's just not the case.
Okay.
So, the next opinion he goes into David Kitreus, who was a Lutheran at that time. Very little note today. Nobody particularly pays much attention to. He never had the prominence that others did in through the ages. But
okay.
So he teaches in this place in the Apocalypse the name of Antichrist is Latinos. It's from the Greek word, or in Hebrew, Romeyet, which is Roman. Hence, the Pope, who is a Latin prince, since he rules in Latium and is the Roman pontiff, must be Antichrist. Theodore Bibliander.
Great reasoning there.
What's that?
I said great reasoning there.
I know, right? Theodore Bibliander teaches the same thing, and for that reason, the 11th table of his chronology, which he begins in the year 600, he titles the Latin popes. There are two reasons. One, what St. Irenaeus teaches in Book 5, which has the appearance of truth, that this is going to be the name of Antichrist, and that really the letters of this name add up to the number as follows. And so so Bellarmine then does in the book, you can see it, there's a calculation of the table of the Hebrew name Romiyet.
Yep.
Romiyet. And I can't pronounce phonetically all those letters because, again, I don't actually know the Hebrew. Somebody did that for me, so I was able to put that together. Latinos, so that's the Greek lambda, right? 30, alpha is 1, tau is 300, epsilon is 5, iota is worth 10, nu is worth 50, omicron, which is O, that's 70, and sigma, the S, is worth 200. So altogether you get 666 out of that. Then he has in the following column the name Teitan. And Teitan essentially means the sun, or the light of the rays of the sun. So they have it there, again, the tau 300 and so on and so forth. So the numbers add up again to 666. So then Bellarmine goes on. This opinion is completely careless. In the first place, Irenaeus certainly says that the name Latinos can probably be accommodated to Antichrist, but he adds it is much more probable that the name Antichrist is not Latinos, but Taitan, which also expresses that number, and the name in is much more clear since it means the light of the sun. Besides, the conjecture of Irenaeus, which was something at that time, is nothing now, for he says it is probable that Antichrist will be called Latinum, not because he rules in Latium, but because the Latins then ruled so extensively and held almost the whole world. He means namely the Roman Empire.
Right.
Since Antichrist ought to be a very powerful king, without a doubt he will seize the most powerful kingdoms that he will discover. Moreover, Irenaeus says that the kingdom of the Latins is the most powerful, since they really ruled then. Certainly that conjecture avails to nothing in our times, for the Latins no longer rule throughout the world. Instead, the Turks really rule, and among us, the Spanish and the French, but not the Latins. So anyway, so that the first issue is, why did Irenaeus say that Latinos was a possible interpretation for 666, right? Because he assumed it might have something to do with the Roman Empire. So the next thing, besides the name Latin, that it would mean Rome, is not written for epsilon iota, EI, but through the simple iota, and thence it does not render that number. In the same way, the comment can be refuted on the word Romiyet, for Roman cannot end in a tav, the letter T in Hebrew,
Okay.
since it would be a masculine noun. For that ending is feminine in Hebrew. So without the letter tav, the number 400 is missing for the name of Antichrist. Moreover, the noun Latinos, if it will be the same of Antichrist, will be proper to him especially in use, just as Rathas teaches, because it will need to be shown and assigned by all who buy or sell. Yet the name Latinos is common. Still, no pope has ever been called Latinus, either for his own name or for the name they take up. The popes never call themselves Latins, only bishops or popes. Next, Romanus was a proper name of only one pontiff, though still he could not be Antichrist since he did not live more than 4 months. Secondly, such a name is common. Next, if only this name, Latinos or Romanus, would affect the number 666, our adversaries might have an argument. But innumerable names are discovered that render this number. Hippolytus the Martyr, in the Sermon of the Consummation of the World, recorded another name which renders that number. Arnoomai, that is, I refuse. Arathas records 7. Lampetes, renowned. Teitan, that is the sun or the light of the sun. Onoketes, that is victor. Kakos Hodegos, that is an evil dictator, essentially, a wicked general. Alethes, Blaberos, that is the truly wounding. Palai Basikanos, that is once hating. And then they even bring one in from Gothic, which is Amnas Adikos. I don't even properly know what that means because it's some kind of Gothic name, but nevertheless, it comes out as 666 in the Latin numbers if you take the D for 500 and C for 100, etc., as is customary. So then he goes on to, other Protestant writers, and so then he says, William Lindanus remarks that Martin Luther rendered the number 666 if Latin numbers would be received in the same manner that Greek and Hebrews use their numbers. And so he gives the number system, A is 1, D is 2, C is 3, D is 4, etc. So kind of, likening the Greek number system to the Roman numbers.
Okay.
Okay. So what if you did that? And then, if Luther does that, you can render the number 666. So for the something to do with the Pope. So, however, as Gilbert Genebrandus remarks in the last book of his chronology, even the name of Luther in Hebrew makes the number 666, namely Luliter.
That's funny. This is The Modern Wrong World Made Right. This is Calvin Was Wrong, volume 2, episode number 5. We are discussing chapter number 10 of the book AntiChrist, which you can find at mikechurch.com/shop and my Founders Trading Post, and at Ryan Grant's site at mediatrixpress.com. It's MEDIATRIX press.com. I just wonder, as we're reading this, and as folks are listening to it, and as I'm following along here, it seems to me, and we've been doing this for quite some time now, almost a year, that these arguments that are made, it seems to me like they must have been made by Luther and Calvin and these other people that you're citing that are being cited today. They must have been made under the assumption that no one would ever check the facts, and that there wasn't going to be a challenge to them, because some of these arguments are so ridiculous that it just strains credulity. And Bellarmine is treating them with the utmost care and importance, and like we talked about in the last episode, seeing to it that no proverbial stone is left unturned, and every single one of them is answered, no matter how ridiculous he thinks they are, right?
Pretty much. That's where he takes it up, even if it is the most absurd thing. Now, one of the things that some of the Protestant authors do, I won't say that for Luther and Calvin directly, but some of the others and preachers and whatnot, is they'll take their knowledge, whether good or not good, of Hebrew and Greek, and make the use of these types of things as well to kind of bamboozle the common populace. So the argument ad ignorantiam. So,
right.
Well, the people don't know Hebrew, so we can get away with saying this, and nobody's ever going to fact check it. And so Luther, for example, boasted of his knowledge of Hebrew and Greek and many others, but they constantly overlook certain arguments that come from it. So Bellarmine was a true genius with Hebrew. He would, even though at that time, Hebrew was a kind of like a quaint language of, some scholars here and there, but very few people actually took up the study of it. It was hard to get people who would chair Hebrew departments, and there were no easy books for learning Hebrew. So how Bellarmine learned Hebrew is actually a bit interesting. In those days, if you want to learn Hebrew now, well, you get the tapes, you get a book, get a couple of books, computer program, YouTube. I don't know. You got all kinds of resources for picking up and learning Hebrew, and provided you have the time. And then you have a grammar you can read and such things. Bellarmine did not have any of that. You had a book by Vitabulis, The Rules for Rabbis. You had, which are basically commentaries on how Hebrew grammar works, which without any kind of order or sense, really. It was kind of more alphabetical to various points. You had another book, and a similar thing in rabbinical text and whatnot. And you had testimony from St. Jerome and other things. So Bellarmine manages to put it all together and to teach himself Hebrew. And then, ends up in a whole, commentary on the very first work of the book of Genesis, Bereshith, which was in the beginning. Okay. So he spends his time working on, even starts making scholarly criticism of certain things Jerome said and everything, which is he was such an extraordinary beginner. So he wrote a Hebrew grammar, which actually was one of the standard references for Hebrew, even amongst Protestants, for hundreds of years. Then he made a challenge that he would teach anyone enough Hebrew in a week that they could read the Old Testament with nothing but a dictionary. So that was, and of course, a few people took him up on it, and they found he was right. So, I mean, Bellarmine is just one of those first-rate geniuses, much in the same way that he taught himself Greek when the Jesuits had sent him to a school where he was supposed to teach a lecture on Demosthenes, which is basically teaching an advanced Greek course. And he's like, well, I don't know any Greek besides the alphabet. And they said, oh, well, you'll make do. And so he, spent his scanty free time reading as much Greek and grammar as he could. And then the day at his first class, he said, now we're going to review some elementary grammar for all you slackers who might have forgot. And then as he's teaching himself, just to keep himself a few lessons ahead of where the kids are. But then within 2 weeks, he was completely fluent in it. So first-rate, genius in all respects.
Right. Well, that shows through in all the work. Because he is so thorough, and it's no, I guess the proper word or the proper term would be hearsay. There's not a lot of hearsay in Bellarmine's written responses to Luther and Pedrea or David Cretreus and Calvin and Illyricus and Erasmus and some of the other ones that we've heard from. He's very factual and, just bullet point by bullet point, bop, 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 bop. He just shoots these arguments down. All right, so we're continuing on with the Antichrist, number 666, from the 10th chapter of the book, Antichrist. We're with our Latin expert, Ryan Grant. And at this juncture, he says, I add two other things for the sake of Luther and Cretreus. I don't read the Greek or speak it, so I'll let you pick it up from there.
So what he says there is that it builds on the last point, that if you render David Cretreus' name into Hebrew, and the rendering that Bellarmine has there is the name, David Cretreus in Hebrew. Okay. And then he has Saxoneos, which is that the Greek says, and it means the Saxon. Mm-hmm. So he says these render 666, and the last one agrees with Luther, just the same as Latin does to Pope. So literally, because they're saying Latinos, and the Pope is a Latin, lives in Latium, so therefore he must be Antichrist. So then Bellarmine says, well, Saxoneos actually renders 666, actually more correctly than Latinos, we might add. And as a result, maybe, if that's the case, that being a Latinos made the Pope Antichrist, then being a Latin, that being a Saxon would make Luther Antichrist because he has 666.
So several different candidates, several different word candidates for the 666 being names, proper nouns being rendered as 666 using. Now, what was the term again?
Gematria.
Gematria, using gematria. It's the modern wrong world made right. This is Calvin Was Wrong, Volume 2, Episode number 5. And if you'd like to copy of the book, if you'd like to read this, it's easy to do. Just go to mikechurch.com/shop, and you can find the book Antichrist there. Or you could go to Ryan's site at mediatrixpress.com. It's mediatrixpress.com, and there's lots and lots of books published by Ryan that you could find there as well. Continuing on, the third opinion is of many Catholics who suspect Antichrist will be called, and again, I think that's Greek, isn't it?
Sorry, I was moving ahead in the page. Yes, Antemos.
Okay. Because
the name agrees with him and also renders the number exactly as Ricardus and others argue. So then he goes through, certain Catholics who believe that this was, this is going to be his name. Because again, it's people, because they have this cryptic passage in the Apocalypse. So everyone's trying to work to figure out what it could be. So anyway, so he adds that the Rupert, who was an abbot in the Middle Ages, he had refuted this opinion. because the name which John insinuates will not be the name imposed upon Antichrist by his opponents, but the name which he'll take unto himself and boast in, so much so that he'll command it to be written on the foreheads of men. And that's essentially what Bellarmine's talking about there. So then he goes to the next one, which is Rupert himself's opinion. So he believes that this number does not mean the name of Antichrist, but means a threefold prevarication carried out by the devil in Antichrist. So for a series of 6 numbers, because it does not reach as far as the 7s, in which there is the rest and beatitude. Right? And so he thought that the number of the creature perishing through prevarication from the rest was what was meant there. So the first is
okay.
He transgressed when he sinned in himself, and then when he made the first man sin, he added 60 to that simple 6. And then thirdly, he will transgress when he will seduce the whole world through Antichrist, and so then there would be a 600 to the 60. Right? And so that was Rupert's opinion. So the next one is Bede, who takes Saint Bede takes a very contrary view. So he teaches that the number 6 is perfect because God created the heaven and the earth in 6 days. So then 60 is more perfect in 600, the most perfect, from which he gathers that Antichrist is meant by the number 666 because he will usurp for himself the most perfect tribute which should be given to God alone. So we read a figure of it in the book of Kings, where a weight of gold, which is offered to Solomon each year, was 666,000 talents. These two opinions do not appear to sufficiently square with what John says, since that number is the number of a name, not a dignity, or a sin, that is a prevarication. Yet these fathers would hold their opinions on this passage with as much suspicion and conjecture. So that's the important thing, is that all the fathers, whenever they did get into this opinion, they specifically, they did not hold it as an article of faith, but rather as an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not something that all Catholics are held to believe, but this is what they believed was the case. So Bellarmine adds, now, therefore, the truest opinion of this matter is of those who confess their ignorance and say that they still do not know the name of Antichrist. Such an opinion is of Irenaeus, Erathos, and others in this on this passage of the Apocalypse. And if I may, I will ascribe the words of Irenaeus, because David Catreus exhorts his readers to do the same thing, saying, being zealous, I exhort you that you view the last pages of Irenaeus in this place of the Apocalypse, and which profitably and piously dispute on this number, and among the rest he judges the Latin or Roman as the name of Antichrist, that is Latinos, etc. Now Irenaeus has the following: it is more certain and less hazardous to await the fulfillment of the prophecy than to be making surmises and casting about for any names that may present themselves, inasmuch as many names can be found possessing the number mentioned. And the same question will, after all, remain on... sorry, I lost my place there. And the same question will, after all, remain unsolved. For if there are a number of names found possessing this number, it will be asked which among them shall the man bear when he comes.
Mm-hmm.
It is not through a want of names containing the number of that name that I say this, but on account of the fear of God and zeal for the truth. For the name Euanthos contains the required number, but I make no claim regarding it. Then also Latinos has the number 666, and that is also probable, this being the name of the last kingdom seen by Daniel. For the Latins are they who at present bear rule, or essentially that means rule the world. I will not, however, make any boast over this, right? So anyway, so Irenaeus continues on going over saying that, well, we don't know, and we're not going to know. So let's again just be watchful and on our guard, right? And so, but Bellarmine just takes some amusement out of that, because you have David Catreus who, is telling his readers to just look at what Irenaeus says, because he says Latinos, and they're trying to again use this to continue urging that the Pope is actually the Antichrist. So anyway, so as he goes through that particular business, trying to figure out the next point I wanted to pick up. We should note that Gematria is actually used today in a lot of other places that are a little more insidious. You have Celtic Gematria.
Okay.
You have, so if you ever see, for example, Fox with an FOX and the O, and it has like an X in the middle.
Okay.
That's actually a Celtic gematria to also spell out 666. That's one of those things most people don't know, and you see it in various commercial products.
Okay.
Not because there's a big conspiracy theory amongst these corporations that all secretly worship the devil, but rather because that type of thing is so penetrated through artist circles and other people that when various companies will contract for a logo, people will design them a logo and throw in some gematria into it, and that's actually how it gets around. And a lot of people are entirely ignorant of it. And certain Satanists will use Celtic gematria and things like that. So it's one of those things to be on your guard for.
So some people think that the Procter & Gamble logo says 666.
It wouldn't surprise me if it did. I don't know that from having looked at it or studied it intensively, but and again, it's not the type of thing where each and every corporation is secretly, got a little satanic club. They're not all, at Bohemian Grove with the Republicans worshiping Moloch, but they're, but they contract for various art and logos, and lots of people in various quarters, on the other hand, use gematria and make use of it for that. So that's how it gets around.
One large example is the Monster Energy drink.
Yes, that's right.
They use that symbol in the O, right?
They use a lot of symbols on the Monster can.
Okay. But I think on the in their actually logo that says Monster, I think that O is for the O for Monster is what you're talking about.
They use the claw scratch. Is a 6, the 666. That they kind of resemble that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this on the Snopes website about Procter and Gamble and the 666 alleged mark that's on it, and it's debunked. It's false.
Well, that's good. Although, to be honest, and they could very well be right about that. But to be honest, I don't trust Snopes as far as I can throw because they're very clearly agenda-driven as well. But still,
yes, they are.
They may very well be right about that.
Yeah, they. If you don't know better, you think that Snopes is like a clearinghouse for the truth. It's not.
No,
it's not.
If only it were.
Right.
I mean, they do get some things right. Actually, it kind of connects to this too. The whole question of putting chips in your hand is the mark of the beast, right? So there's a story that continues to go around Facebook. It will not die. That supposedly Brian Williams and NBC in like 2006 reported that the government will require everyone to have chips by 2018 or some nonsense like that. And Snopes has a debunk on the story. And it's actually a very good write-up, whoever did it, because it is nonsense. They did not say that. There is no program to do that. Brian Jennings did not even say it will be mandated. They said, could we all have these? And it was just basically his, not Brian Jennings, Brian Williams. He said basically it was his extemporaneous comment on it. So if that constitutes a Freudian slip that's now clear evidence, I mean, they might as well be like some of these guys that Bellarmine's arguing about. So
Ryan, there is a cottage industry on decoding the monster logo and using Hebrew numerals to make 666. If you search for Monster Drink logo 666,
I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah, it's all over. I'm on the second page, and I haven't exhausted the amount of resources on it. Right. So this is the Modern Wrong World made right, and we're making no claims that the Veritas Radio Network logo or the Crusade Channel logo equals 666. If it does, it's just coincidence.
Or when Hillary Clinton will win by 66.6% in November.
Let us pray that does not occur.
I agree.
Yes.
But if it did, that's probably how it will happen.
So the number 6, according to the Hebrew alphabet, is Vav. And the scratches that make up, that Christopher said, the three scratches that make up M, those are 3 Vavs, and that's the number 6. So it's 666 right in the logo. Although, if I'm understanding Bellarmine correctly, you add the sum total of the numbers up.
That's right, and so it has to be that all the numbers that are expressed by the letters involved have to equal that number somehow, 666. So it's
Right.
not just that this one is 6 and this one is 6 and this one is 6. It might be this one's 2 and this one's 500 and this one's 4, and then this one is another 100, so there you end up, or another 150 or whatever, so you end up with the 666. That's actually how it happens. So if we look again, there's an interesting thing that comes up here. So he has another commentary about this to kind of buttress his point that we are not going to know about this, right? So he says, here we must remark that when he will have come, the name of Antichrist will be well known. Before Christ came, the Jews did not know for certain by what name he would be called, although the prophets preached very much concerning his name. Even one of the Sibyls, right? Now the Sibyls are Roman visionaries.
Okay.
So you see them mentioned in the Aeneid. The Sibyls had various prophecies about events in Roman history, and the Romans had seen a lot of this had come true. Now, actually, in Virgil, for example, Virgil, in one, I think it's Eclogue 6, it's often called the Messianic Eclogue, because he starts to basically foretell in that particular poetry the coming of Christ. And describes a number of the circumstances in it that match very well, albeit from a pagan perspective, the coming of Christ. Because God, you see that so like with the oracle of Apollo and Delphi and things like that in the ancient world, where it seems like on various occasions they really did get real prophecy, and then other times things that were so ambiguous you could take it either way. And it's not impossible for someone to have, even for the heathen, to have actually had a true revelation of what was going to come, at least as they understood it. So just to preface that out there, and that's how the church has always held that too, that it is possible for the heathen to have revelation of things. St. Paul, in fact, appeals to this when he points out in Ephesus this altar of the unknown. I'm sorry, at Athens, this altar of the unknown God, and says, "Hey, see, you guys already had revelation about the real God. It's sitting right here. You just didn't know it. Now I'm making him known to you." Right? So you have things of that sort. But nevertheless, so one of the Sibyls, these Roman seers, in the first book of the Songs of the Sibyls, remarked that the number of the name of Christ, of the Messiah, they use the name Christos, because in Greek that means anointed, literally in Greek. So, so that term Christos appears in pre-Christian Greek literature without Jewish influence, because that's just what it means. It means anointed, right? So his number is going to be 888, even as John writes, the Antichrist number is 666. But after Christ came, all controversy was abolished, and everyone knows he is called Jesus. So then Bellarmine has a table based on the Sibylline verse, and he has, so each letter of Jesus's name, makes the required number to get you 888. So he adds, it happens that it is common to all prophecies of the prophets that they're ambiguous and obscure until they are fulfilled, just as Irenaeus rightly teaches and proves.
So in other words, well, for Catholic listeners, this would make sense because you're not supposed to give in to, if you fell into despair over this or not being able to know who the Antichrist was, you wouldn't be in very good shape, and you certainly wouldn't be pursuing a state of grace. So what Irenaeus is teaching about this should make sense to our Catholic listeners today. Other Christians may have some questions about it, but in as much as sometimes these things we just leave them and we just trust in God's providence, and that as Father that wrote the introduction to one of your books likes to say, and he doesn't like his name used publicly, so I won't say it, Father Philip. God's in charge and he knows what he's doing. And
that's it.
And you should conform your mind to that and not worry about what number Antichrist is going to be. So now for this number 888, where does 888 come from again?
It comes from the Sibylline verses, and they say that there'll be so many groups of 8 that will so essentially comes out to 888, which they say is the number for the salvation of the human race, right? So that's in the first book of the Sibylline books that were preserved, or some of which were covered, and the books. I can't remember. I was trying to find some study on this, and I haven't been able to find anyone who's pursued it to verify with modern scholarship, this particular question. So I just really have what Bellarmine has, and I've seen the reference in a few other people, but I'm not sure how much the Romans actually got into this particular thing. There were prophecies in the ancient world around the time of Christ, actually. Like I mentioned, of course, Virgil writes, the famous messianic eclogue. But there was a general belief, even amongst the Romans and Greeks, that a god was going to be born into the world, that was going to transform the world in some way. And so a lot of people actually thought that was Alexander the Great. For a long time, that kind of particular belief came in. Some Romans, with some generous help from Octavian's propaganda machine, believed that it would be Augustus Caesar.
Okay.
So things of that sort, but nobody really knew. And again, I'm not sure how much this was paid attention to or taken up, but nevertheless, so the point remains that you had the preaching of the prophets, which was clear about the Messiah was going to come, the Messiah, right, the Christos. He was going to come and restore all things. He was going to, but of course, in a spiritual kingdom, not in a human one. He's going to come and take upon himself all the covenant curses to redeem mankind, right? The suffering servant of Isaiah and everything else. So all this has been prophesied, and the Jews all know it. So even like Philo of Alexandria, for example, is reading various prophecies in the prophets, and he's a Jewish rabbi in Alexandria, Greek writing, Greek speaking. He's doing a commentary on some of the prophets. I don't remember exactly which one this was, but he says that when the Messiah comes, all the animal sacrifices in the temple will cease, and only the Todah will remain.
Okay.
And that's what Philo of Alexandria says. So the Todah, if you translate that into Greek, that's Eucharistesos, or Thanksgiving.
Thanks. Right, Thanksgiving.
And so then obviously Eucharist, right? And so that's what Todah, and the Todah was an offering of unleavened bread by the Jews. And so they saw that this was coming. They just didn't know the name and the date and the time, right? And that was the problem. So even with that, and then like if they had been, if the Jews had been given, his number is going to be 888, and I mean, even with all the traditions of Jewish gematria, they'd never come on the name Yesos, right? They would never, which is the name Jesus in Greek,
okay,
which is it's just the Greek rendering of Yeshua, Yesos, right? It's just a normal Greek ending for a name coming from a Semitic language. So they never would have figured that out.
Okay.
They never would have come to that. So what Bellarmine is using this to show is that we're not going to come up with what 666 means in this life, if it means anything at all. And that's the I take the latter view, that it has a meaning that's rather different, but it's not actually gematria. But then again, that could be wrong too. So who knows? So Bellarmine adds to conclude. From these we take up the unanswerable argument to prove the Roman pontiff is not the Antichrist, and that Antichrist himself has not yet come. If Antichrist would have come and was the Roman pontiff, his name would be established for certain, as predicted by John, just for us. Christ, now there is just as Christ for us. Now there is no question, not even amongst the Turks, the Jews, the pagans, to the extent that he is named. But on the name of Antichrist, there's still a great deal of controversy. We make it plain by so many opinions that have been recited and refuted. Therefore, the prophecy of John has not yet been fulfilled. Hence, Antichrist has not yet come, nor is he the Roman pontiff. Add the confirmation from the confession of Augustine Marleratus, who, in a great explication gathered from various Lutheran and Calvinist on the New Testament, so writes on this citation, quote, "There are nearly so many explications of this passage, whereby it appears it is very obscure and enigmatic," unquote. Yet if the prophecy is still very obscure and enigmatic, then is not fulfilled. Antichrist has not yet come, but accordingly all prophecies, when they are fulfilled, are made evident. Therefore, why does Marlaratus lay down in his preface in the Apocalypse that it is so clear that the Roman pontiff is the Antichrist that if you were silent, the very stones would cry out? As in, it's not. So,
Now there is a verse in one of the Gospels about stones crying out, isn't there?
I think it's in the Old Testament.
Or is it Old
I
Testament?
forget exactly,
Yeah.
but I suppose I could probably find that really quick. But
Yeah, the stones will cry out. I seem to recall.
oh yeah, Luke 19:40.
Okay.
If you keep quiet, these very stones will cry out.
Right. And I think when we were studying cosmology with Brother Francis, that he referenced he referenced that verse from Luke, and he said there's two things. Number one, he actually could make the stones cry out because he's God. But number two, that no one took that as literal, as meaning that the stones would start to sing or anything like that. So,
Although it did happen once, in the life of Saint Bede, Saint Bede the Venerable, it was an English monk in the very early Middle Ages.
Okay.
He wrote the ecclesiastical history. A lot of the information we have of England at that time, he actually wrote. He was a Benedictine monk. So Bede went blind in later life. So, but he would still preach, and a brother would lead him around, and then they tell the people, okay, Father Bede's coming over to preach. You better all come around, and they would. So, Bede comes around, and he's with the monk. The monk leads him out into this field, and nobody's there except a bunch of rocks. So Bede starts preaching, and not knowing that there's nobody there because he's blind. So then when he finishes, one of the stones cries out, "Amen, great Bede."
I actually have heard that story before. This is the Modern Wrong World Made Right. This is Calvin Was Wrong, Volume 2, Episode number 5. And we're just about wrapped up for the day. Next week we'll do Chapter 11 on the mark of Antichrist and continue the discussion. Remember, and we might even get to Chapter 12 as well, on the begetting of Antichrist. There doesn't seem to be any end to the ridiculous arguments that the Protestant reformers could make about the claims of the Roman Pontiff being the Antichrist. So we'll tackle 2 more of them in chapters next week. If you'd like to read this work, then I would encourage you to get a copy of Antichrist, the book, in the Founders Trading Post store at mikechurch.com/shop. And, of course, you can get it at Ryan Grant's store at mediatrixpress.com. It's mediatrixpress.com. And you'll find the book, Antichrist, St. Robert Bellarmine, S.J., translated by Ryan Grant, but forward by Father Philip Wolf, who preaches on this subject also as well. If you surf around, I'm not sure if it's at Romans 10:17 or not. That's where you used to be able to get Father Philip's sermons. But I have heard his sermon on this subject before, his homily. And it's obvious, to me anyways, in what I recall, that he took his argument and his homily argument directly from Bellarmine. As a matter of fact, he references Bellarmine extensively in this. So if you're looking for an audio version of this, there's one out there from Father. I'll see if I can find it and drop a link to it in there. That's about all the time that we have for this week. We didn't take a commercial break, Ryan. We just rolled right through the whole thing. So, folks, you got an entire Modern Wrong World made right without any commercial interruptions. And we can do that here on the Crusade channel, part of the Veritas Radio Network, because we run things and we make the clocks. So we'll see about doing that again next week. And Ryan, I'd like to thank you, of course. What's been the reaction to the life and times of St. John Fisher that we did 2 weeks ago? Oh, he